The bomber was already shaking before the first flak burst appeared. Not violently. Not yet. Just enough for the instruments to rattle softly against their mounts. The engines held steady. 4 steady roars cutting through the thin air at altitude. Then the first explosion bloomed off the left wing. Distant. Heavy. Wrong. The aircraft shuddered, metal flexing under pressure. Loose gear rattled across the floor. No one spoke. Another flak burst. Closer this time. The pilot tightened his grip. His eyes stayed forward. The bomber pushed on. Black clouds of smoke began forming ahead. Thick, unnatural, hanging in the sky like obstacles. A third explosion detonated above the fuselage. The aircraft lurched downward. Warning lights flickered. Just for a second. The co-pilot glanced at the panel. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The tail gunner shifted in his seat. The vibration felt different back there. He could feel it through the metal frame. Not turbulence. Stress. Another burst. This one hit close enough to slap the aircraft sideways. The intercom crackled. Nothing came through. The bomber steadied itself again. Barely. Outside, the formation kept flying. Straight. Unbroken. Inside, something had changed. The pilot adjusted the controls slightly. The aircraft responded slower than expected. A subtle delay. Almost unnoticeable. Almost. Another explosion erupted behind them. This time, the shockwave rolled through the fuselage like a punch. Panels creaked. Rivets screamed. The tail gunner felt the aircraft twist beneath him. He reached for the intercom switch. Before he could speak, the vibration stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Suddenly, the rear of the aircraft felt wrong. Too light. Too quiet. The gunner froze. He looked around his compartment. The guns were still there. The ammo belts still fed. But the sound behind him was gone. No airflow. No resistance. Just open sky. The bomber continued forward, unaware of what it had just lost. The pilot felt it first through the controls. The bomber no longer answered smoothly. Every correction came late. Every adjustment felt heavier than it should. He eased the yoke left. The aircraft hesitated. Then followed. The co-pilot noticed it too. Not a failure. Not yet. Something missing. He checked the trim. Then the rudder. Then the gauges again. All green. That made it worse. The navigator leaned forward from his table. The vibration pattern had changed. The aircraft no longer moved as one piece. It flexed. In the rear, the tail gunner sat perfectly still. The noise behind him was gone, replaced by a steady roar rushing past his shoulders. Cold air pressed in. Hard. He looked back. There should have been metal. There should have been structure. There was only sky. Clouds sliding past where the tail used to be. The gunner didn't shout, didn't panic. He keyed the intercom. "Pilot, do you copy?" Static answered him. He tried again. Nothing. Up front, the pilot felt the aircraft dip unexpectedly. Not sharply, just enough to be wrong. He pulled back. The nose rose too far. The bomber began to oscillate. Up. Down. Up again. The co-pilot grabbed the console. "This doesn't feel right." The pilot nodded. He already knew. The navigator looked up from his charts. "We're losing stability." No one said why. Another gust of wind slammed into the rear of the aircraft. The bomber yawed violently. The pilot fought it, muscles tight, breath controlled. "Something's gone," the co-pilot said quietly. In the tail compartment, The gunner braced his boots against the floor. There was no floor behind him anymore. He could see straight down through the open air, thousands of feet below. The aircraft was flying without its balance, and it didn't know it yet. The pilot eased the throttle back. The bomber stopped fighting him. For a moment, it simply drifted. That scared him more than the shaking. Aircraft were not supposed to drift. "Check the tail controls," he said. The co-pilot reached for the indicator. The needle barely moved. He tried again, harder. Nothing changed. He looked up slowly, then turned toward the rear of the aircraft. "Navigator," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Can you see the tail from your position?" The navigator stood. He leaned toward the narrow passage. There was smoke, then open air. The rear fuselage ended early. Jagged metal twisted backward like torn fabric. He didn't need binoculars. He didn't need confirmation. "The tail is gone," he said. Silence filled the cockpit. Not shock, not panic, just silence. The pilot stared straight ahead, hands locked on the controls. He imagined the weight that used to be there, the balance, the stability, gone. The co-pilot swallowed. "How are we still flying?" The navigator answered quietly. "Momentum." Another gust hit them. The nose dropped sharply this time. The pilot pulled back. Too much. The bomber pitched upward, then snapped down again. "Easy," the co-pilot warned. "Easy." In the rear, the tail gunner listened to voices he could barely hear. He understood enough. The aircraft lurched again. This time, harder. His harness pulled tight. The open sky rushed closer. He pressed the intercom. "Pilot, I can see the wings from back here." No one replied. Up front, the pilot made a choice without announcing it. He trimmed the nose down, reduced speed, accepted the descent. The bomber stopped fighting. It began to fall. Not fast, but steadily. And everyone on board felt it. The bomber continued to descend. Slow, uncontrolled, but stable enough to stay together. The pilot focused on one thing: keeping the nose steady. Every instinct told him to pull back. Every correction screamed to fight the fall. He ignored it. Fighting would tear the aircraft apart. The co-pilot monitored the airspeed. Too fast, and the bomber would brake. Too slow, and it would stall. There was no safe range, only a narrow space between disaster and collapse. The navigator calculated quickly, then stopped. Numbers didn't apply anymore. They were flying something that was no longer an aircraft. It was momentum held together by force of will. "Bail out?" the co-pilot asked. The pilot didn't answer. He knew what that meant. Jumping from an aircraft with no tail meant being pulled into the slipstream, being torn apart before the parachute could open. The pilot glanced at the formation ahead. They were already far away, still intact, still flying. No one was coming back for them. Another gust hit the bomber from below. The aircraft lurched violently. The tail gunner slammed against his harness. The open air rushed closer. "Pilot," he said, breathing hard. "I'm still here." That was all he said. Up front, the pilot made his decision. "We stay," he said. Not loudly, not dramatically. "We stay with it." The co-pilot nodded. No argument, no discussion. The navigator strapped himself in. The radio operator stopped calling for help. Every man understood what staying meant. The bomber leveled slightly, not because it was fixed, but because it was no longer being fought. The descent slowed. For the first time since the flak hit, the aircraft felt balanced. Broken, but balanced. And that was enough to keep flying. The bomber no longer flew with the formation. It followed its own path now. Lower, slower, alone. The pilot made small corrections. Nothing sharp, nothing sudden. Every movement was measured. The co-pilot called out speed changes, a few knots too fast, then a few too slow. The aircraft answered late, always late. Below them, the cloud layer thinned. Patches of ground appeared through the haze. Fields, rivers, nothing recognizable. The navigator tried to match landmarks. He stopped after the third attempt. They were off the map. Fuel continued to burn. Not faster than before, but every minute mattered now. The radio remained silent. The operator listened anyway. No escorts, no guidance, no reassurance. Another gust rolled the bomber sideways. The pilot countered gently. The aircraft settled again. Still intact. In the tail section, the gunner stayed strapped in. He did not look down anymore. The open air behind him roared constantly. There was no protection, no barrier. Only the harness kept him in place. Up front, the pilot watched the horizon carefully. Any climb risked a stall. Any descent risked losing control. So he held it level, as best he could. The engines droned unevenly. One coughed briefly, then steadied. No one spoke. Time stretched. Every second felt borrowed. The bomber crossed into clearer air. The sky ahead looked empty. No fighters, no flak, no movement at all. Just distance. The pilot allowed himself a slow breath. Not relief, just focus. They were still flying, and as long as the bomber stayed in the air, they still had a chance. The airfield appeared without warning. Not lights, not signals. Just a long strip of ground cutting through the landscape. The pilot saw it and didn't speak. He adjusted the heading slightly, carefully. Too much correction would end it. Too little would miss the approach entirely. The co-pilot watched the airspeed. It hovered at the edge of control. Any slower, and the bomber would drop. Any faster, and it would break apart on landing. The pilot lowered the nose just enough. The bomber descended. Not smoothly, but steadily. The ground rose faster than expected. The pilot held the controls firm, hands locked, breathing slow. The wheels touched. Hard. The aircraft bounced once, then slammed down again. Metal screamed. The fuselage shuddered violently. The bomber rolled forward, dragging what remained of its rear section behind it. Then it slowed and stopped. For a moment, no one moved. No cheering. No relief. Just silence. The pilot loosened his grip. The co-pilot exhaled slowly. The navigator unstrapped, careful not to rush. In the tail section, the gunner stayed still. The open air behind him finally quiet. He keyed the intercom one last time. "I'm here," he said. This time, the answer came back. Ground crews approached cautiously. They stared at the aircraft in disbelief. The tail was gone. Completely. There was no explanation for how it had stayed airborne. No technical answer. It shouldn't have. But it did. Not because it was strong. Not because it was designed for it. Because every man inside knew when to stop fighting the aircraft and start flying it as it was. Broken. Unbalanced. Still moving. The bomber would never fly again. But the crew walked away, and that was enough.